Florida's real estate boom is over. Many years ago, Southwest Florida was the fastest growing region in the United States. Ironically, Southwest Florida now leads the United States as the fastest shrinking real estate market. This is the Fruitville exit in Sarasota, which was one of those places that had an explosion of new home construction. You can see a garbage can with a "Smile, you're on camera" sign. Is it because people are stealing the scrap metal out of it, or is it because people are dumping garbage here? Either way, you don't see that everywhere in the United States. Florida is probably the only place in the United States miserable enough where you need to have a freaking sign on a garbage can. A recent study found that in Texas, people are making more money and paying less rent. If that isn't the case of just about every other state in the country. We're paying California prices for real estate, but getting paid Mississippi and Alabama salaries in Florida now. The top 5 most crumbling real estate markets in America exist in Southwest Florida right now. According to Zillow, Charlotte County, Florida leads the nation with a nearly 9% drop year over year. Sarasota's demise is nearing 7% now. If anything positive can be said about Sarasota, at least the inventory is low at less than 3,000 houses. Manatee County, right next door, that's the Bradenton area, has over 1,700 more listings than Sarasota, despite having a smaller population. Rents have not decreased at all in the Sarasota area. However, the same cannot be said about Fort Myers. Lee County, Florida is now approaching 20,000 homes listed. Rents have dropped by as much as $600 in the Fort Myers area over the last year. An economist stipulates that the reason is that people were buying homes with their net worth, but were never able to create any actual income in the state of Florida. You guys remember that during COVID, they were telling people that Florida is open for business? Well, now we're abandoned, boarded up, and going into foreclosure for business. Florida's little gimmick didn't last too long, did it? But wait, there's a new gimmick now. We're going to get rid of property taxes. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of a person who's gambling and all of a sudden plays every single dollar he has, hoping that finally one last gamble will pay off. And the person that's about to take all your money, encouraging you to blindly make the bet and go all in for everything. This is only Florida's latest gimmick of convincing people to continue to buy real estate, residential properties, in a state where people can't make enough money to live. During COVID, we left the state of Florida and moved to Alabama. I grew to hate that state. It really wasn't for me, but I got a taste of what it's like to live in a state where the economy actually makes sense, where you actually have disposable income, where the cost of living isn't higher than the money you make. This situation in Florida keeps getting worse and worse. The only reason that we were able to stay in Florida is because there were so many bad news stories to cover that we were actually making a crap load of money last year just covering all the horrendous things that were happening in Florida. When you can make a freaking living covering all the bad news stories that are coming out of a state, that should give you an idea how fast the ship is sinking. Literally, me and my wife were going to leave the state of Florida last year, and we decided to stay because of how much money we were making covering all of the bad things that were happening in the state. Immigration laws that have failed. Homelessness has become rampant. Crime has become rampant. Literally, you can make a news story about crime and destruction and disaster in Florida on a daily basis. Then we got hit by 2 hurricanes. It's crazy to think that the only reason we've been able to afford living in Florida is because we've been able to cover all the horrendous disasters that are happening in the state that are so newsworthy that we were able to make a living covering the destruction and damage of this state on a daily freaking basis. And that's pretty much an embarrassing thing to say, but it's the reality of how bad things have gotten in Florida that we decided to stay here because it's actually newsworthy how much destruction is happening in the state. That's like saying you move to freaking a war zone to cover a war because, well, it's newsworthy. I know that sounds horrible, but it's the reality of why we're still in Florida, because I don't think any other state could provide as much horrific content as the state of Florida does. It's just crazy to think that things got so bad in Florida that we were able to afford living in Florida by covering all the horrific things that were happening here. And now that Florida's kind of, well, it's in a decline now, it's not as newsworthy. Now there's a new gimmick, and this is the way the state of Florida has always been. Every time things don't work for Florida, they promise people something incredible that they buy into, and then people continue to move here as if they didn't learn their lesson from the last freaking gimmick. Collier County is the Naples area. It's the richest county in Southwest Florida, and in Naples they're at nearly 6% decline. Now, Lee and Collier are the same MLS, and they have had as much as 3,000 price reductions over a weekly basis, going to show that in Florida right now, people are trying to bail out. What are some of the reasons people are bailing out of Florida right now? This real estate nightmare isn't happening everywhere in the United States right now. It's happening here. We are the epicenter of it. Why is this area the epicenter of a real estate crash? If you live here, it's pretty freaking obvious. Without getting political, I think most of us know the real reason why things in Southwest Florida have gone to crap. I don't like to elaborate on politics, but there's no real way to explain the situation here without being clear about what the real problem is. And I think most of us understand this without me having to explain it. So you can get that information from other YouTubers, not from me. Let's start off in Collier County, Florida. They have nearly 9,000 listings, and the median listing price is well over $700,000. Practically nobody can afford to live in Naples. Naples is the 1%ers of 1%ers. Along the coastline of Naples, where the most affluent people live, according to the Florida Voter Registry, those streets directly on the water are voting about 93% Republican. According to the property appraiser, some of these properties are paying about $53,000 a year in property taxes. Yet despite the fact voting overwhelmingly Republican, this area also has the largest number of undocumented people by percentage of the population of anywhere in the United States. Because despite being the richest county in Florida, they also have the most income inequality of anywhere in the state. These rich people along the coast, they demand and they require an exploitable labor force of undocumented people because they don't want to pay U.S. citizens enough money to work on their properties. Not to get political once again, but when you have the largest immigration policy efforts that have ever taken place, and you have the largest population of undocumented people of anywhere in the country, you're going to have a problem. On the other hand, Charlotte County, Florida is the most economically deprived county in Southwest Florida, and they have been hit the hardest. And the second worst hit, Sarasota County, the area affected the most is Northport, which is adjacent to Charlotte County. If you've been watching my series on ICE deportations, you may remember that this area is having the most ICE and immigration detentions in Southwest Florida. So we can start to see a correlation between ICE and immigration detentions, undocumented populations, and the reliance of the wealthy on the people that are being exploited. But interestingly enough, most of the efforts for ICE and immigration detentions are not happening in Naples along the beaches where the rich people live, or here on these beautiful islands of Sarasota, but they're happening in the bedroom communities. Now, a little bit ago, the state of Florida implemented SB 1718, which was the pre-immigration deportation situation we have now on a national level. It should have already been happening in Florida, but practically with SB 1718, nothing changed in Florida. If you guys remember the videos I made explaining that law that came into the state of Florida, you may remember that there were loopholes for larger developers to continue exploiting undocumented workers. So while the E-Verify and other systems made it harder for restaurants and small business owners, like regular people like me and you, it actually made it more advantageous for developers and builders and people working on large projects, like those contractors working for the state, to continue exploiting undocumented workers. So what SB 1718 actually did is that it implemented throughout the entirety of the state of Florida, Regulations that made it more difficult for the regular people to use undocumented workers, but it left vast loopholes that builders and developers could use to continue exploiting the undocumented on a large scale. Predominantly, these were large building projects like the ones happening in Sarasota and Bradenton as well. And let's not forget all of the state projects that are happening of state road construction, like the ones that are taking place now throughout the entirety of Florida, where these projects are mostly using undocumented workers. So now with the new federal immigration laws, it kind of screws up the plan for the state of Florida. That's why there was a huge ruckus recently in Florida because of the new immigration laws that were federal. So now the state of Florida is giving the power to local law enforcement agencies to make ICE detentions because they really don't want the federal government to get involved, because most likely the federal government is going to shut down the same businesses that the state of Florida was sheltering with SB 1718. So now the state of Florida grants their counties, cities, and municipalities the opportunity to make ICE detentions as if they were ICE agents themselves, because they don't want the state of Florida to become a target of the federal government, because it's actually the state of Florida that is exploiting migrants more than anybody else, because the state laws like SB 1718 opened up the way for larger contractors to be able to just pay a $500 daily fine for undocumented workers, something that the state and other large contractors could afford. But if you're just building 5 or 6 houses, you can't afford that daily fine. Now, after SB 1718, we noticed that even the landscaping around sheriff's offices was still being conducted by undocumented migrants. So the state of Florida is in a tricky situation where on a federal level now, the federal government could come in and start to actually dismantle all of the undocumented workers, when the state themselves had become the prime shareholder in undocumented workers after the loss of SB 1718. So the implementation of this law destroyed single-family home construction. And where was single-family home construction happening the most? Charlotte County, Lee County, parts of Sarasota County, not the whole thing, and of course the outskirts of Bradenton, areas like Lakewood Ranch and Parrish. Now, after SB 1718, we saw a complete stop of single-family home construction in places like Fort Myers, Lehigh, Cape Coral, Northport. This came to a complete stop. In fact, in Lehigh Acres, Florida, I recently did a video where you can see single-family homes that were just left unfinished, similar to what happened during the last recession. But with SB 1718, when we saw single-family home construction come to a complete crash and stop, we saw the expansion of even larger projects like the ones people in Sarasota are complaining about now in the celery fields. Basically, it went from let's build single-family homes to let's build larger developments. With that came the idea that if you live in a large development, property taxes are practically irrelevant. So not only did they already have plans in the state of Florida for people not to have to pay property taxes, considering the notion that the new thing in Florida was going to be not so much single-family home construction, which is the only thing they care about is the people that move here to stimulate the economy. But now that large developers building large communities have a monopoly on the entirety of new home construction in the state of Florida, with the projects we've seen in Sarasota, Manatee County, and the end of single-family home construction in the state of Florida on a smaller scale, we knew that that would implement also the new tax laws that they're thinking about for the state of Florida, because after all, from now moving forward, the only people that mattered are the ones that are building new houses in gated communities. Now, gated communities have HOA for the entire maintenance of the entire community. They have HOA fees for their own security. These are basically self-running communities. And the idea would be if you could halt single-family home construction, SB 1718, and give developers complete monopoly on new home construction, what's happening now. When the imminent decline of Florida came and they got rid of property taxes, all of the new home construction would appreciate dramatically because people would be seeking homes not in unincorporated areas or areas that are now not even paying property taxes, right? So they're going to crap. The only place people are going to want to invest is gated communities that are still being built in the state of Florida right now, despite the state's decline. All these changes have been happening sequentially and intentionally so that their finished product, the homes being sold by the developers that are building these large communities inland in Florida now inside of HOAs, they're setting themselves up perfectly to reap the benefit of the appreciation that will come to new home construction in gated communities if the state were to implement no property taxes, because this would be the properties that would be more attractive to people investing. If you don't have property taxes, you practically don't have any public services unless you live in a gated HOA community, which is already exempt. Now, this isn't a new notion. Anybody who's lived in Florida, a place like Naples, like I have, understands the notion that if you live within a HOA, you practically do not need property taxes. This is going to create a situation where there will be a lot of price appreciation inside of gated communities for the wealthy, and it'll leave everybody else in Florida with practically no services, which is their intention to begin with. This is something that 10 or 15 years ago I could have told you about the future of Florida, because you could see it coming with the fact that there were so many gated communities. And again, if you've lived in Florida, you understand the notion that all these gated communities have been paying property taxes on services that are already been rendered by the HOA. In other words, because these large wealthy areas in Florida have so many gated communities, they've been paying into the system while receiving practically nothing in return. So yeah, there is a reserve of some sort. Anyone who's lived in Florida long enough could have already seen these changes coming to the state. There's also been a massive decline in tourism. See, here in Florida, during the off season, now in the spring and summer, we used to get a lot of people internationally, particularly from South America, who would come here to take advantage of the lower prices during the summer. So when all the snowbirds go back home in South Florida, we were relying on Colombians, Venezuelans, Brazilians, Argentinians, Chileans, and other people from the Americas. Their tourist dollars held us together during the off season. Unfortunately for the state of Florida, with the new immigration situation going on, people are afraid to travel to the United States. Now, you may not know this, but during that expression of exploding real estate markets that we had after COVID, it wasn't just people from the United States who drove up the economy. Looking back now at analytics, there was a lot of YouTubers who they were spreading some misinformation, telling people that everybody from New York was buying in Florida. But we all know now the truth, that it was actually people from Latin America that were buying up Miami and South Florida. And the demographic changes that we've seen in the state confirm that it wasn't Americans who were buying in Florida, it was people from Latin America. And the demographics of South Florida have changed dramatically, leaning Hispanic over the last few years, because we're starting to discover now the truth that I was telling you guys all along, that it wasn't American dollars that were bringing up and holding up the economy down here. It was money from South America. Now, when SB 1718 was implemented, everything unraveled when they started to realize that, oh crap, all this money was actually coming from Latin America. The buyers were coming from Latin America. There's a lot of Venezuelan money at the time. Cuba had recently allowed people to start selling their properties, and for some reason that I don't understand, people from all over the world bought real estate in Cuba, which meant that new arrivals from Cuba had hundreds of thousands of dollars in their pocket from the properties they sold before they came. Before the implementation of SB 1718, South Florida was being flooded with money from Latin America, which started to drive up real estate prices in places like Miami, on which many American YouTubers, bloggers, those from New York came over here and tried to cash in on the price appreciation by buying real estate in places like Miami, thinking that this was the new place to be, forgetting that the money was coming from other countries and that that flow of money would eventually get cut off by laws like SB 1718 and now the current administration's immigration policies. Now that the bottom fell out and the money flow got cut off, the state of Florida has been trying to do damage control. I mean, just take a look at Corollary County. Despite the fact that the median listing price is $720,000, about half of the landscape is now majority Hispanic. Cape Coral used to be overwhelmingly white, and now you can see pockets of Hispanic communities all over Cape Coral, and now there's even an Asian community. I believe there are Filipinos out there now. Lehigh Acres became 70% Hispanic. Even areas like Buckingham that used to be something like 98% white are now about 26% Hispanic. So we've seen an incredible demographic change take place in South Florida. As real estate prices got crazy in Miami, we saw a lot of Hispanics move into Henry County. The South Florida inland areas like LaBelle, Montura, Clewiston, Belglade, Pahokee, all those areas along Lake Okeechobee had a huge percentage of people from Miami move to those areas looking for affordability. Looking for affordability, a lot of African Americans from Dade County also moved to the areas south of Lake Okeechobee. Even Highlands and Okeechobee County started to see large Hispanic communities. Areas like Sebring became very noticeably Hispanic. All this happened with the price appreciation. I mean, literally the entire southern half of the Florida map became predominantly Hispanic as this real estate boom unfolds. Then in 2017, Hurricane Maria hits Puerto Rico and a massive influx of Puerto Ricans moves into Central Florida. Now, Central Florida was the buffer zone for appreciation for South Florida. When people couldn't afford to live in South Florida, they would move to Central Florida. And thus, Central Florida, an economically deprived region, had always been a buffer zone for the people who were getting priced out of South Florida. 1 million Puerto Ricans now live in the state of Florida. The state of Florida now has more Puerto Ricans than it does Cubans. And this influx of Puerto Ricans in the Central Florida has created a situation where now the buffer zone that existed for price appreciation in South Florida was no longer available. Many people failed to notice that the reason why price appreciation never capped out in South Florida is because the escape option, Central Florida, was now being bought up by Puerto Ricans, and with that situation, prices had nowhere to go but up. After Puerto Ricans settled in Central Florida, even North Florida, an area that had historically been too hostile and racist for Hispanic communities to thrive, has seen an influx of Hispanics because people have had nowhere else to go. This is exactly what happened in Jacksonville, Florida, a city that had demographically not changed ever. It was a segregated city, and now this is what Jacksonville looks like today. Jacksonville is demographically starting to look like South Florida, with Hispanic pockets throughout the entire city. And many of the black areas are actually Haitians who are also coming from South Florida. They're also Latinos. All your little real estate gurus on YouTube from New York and New Jersey that were making videos about Florida real estate markets exploding. I mean, what happened to all those guys? Half of them disappeared off the face of the earth. But those people misled a lot of people to not understand the real situation with real estate appreciation in South Florida. A lot of the people that moved here from California and New York because Florida's open for business had to close their business in Florida and move back to California and New York because they couldn't find jobs in Florida. And really, this is the real problem with Florida, is that when people move here, they realize insurance keeps rising, everything keeps rising. The only thing that's not rising is the incomes. And these people are coming from states like California and New York where they have jobs and opportunities. And after spending 3 to 5 years in Florida, they realize that their resources are getting drained and they're not getting anywhere because life here isn't like New York. Opportunities here are not like California. People that came here believing in the 2020 COVID dream are starting to realize that they're going to have to move back to California and New York just so they can have jobs because they can't make money. We saw a wave of people move back to California, move back to New York, move back to Connecticut, and all these people that left told me the same exact thing. We just can't make any money in Florida. We made a lot of money in those other states. We created a net worth, but now our network is diminishing and we can't make enough money to live here. So the reality of Florida is that it's a never-ending money pit. And even if you're not paying property taxes, you're still going to have to face the unavoidable reality of Florida for everybody. The fact that eventually you're going to have to leave because there's no way to make a living here. Now you can tell by the volume of real estate available proportionally by these counties exactly what the problem is when you compare them. For example, here in Manatee and Sarasota, the inventory is significantly smaller. Bigger cities, bigger economy, close to Tampa, there's more opportunities here. But when you see a smaller population county like Collier having more than 2 times as much inventory, that should give you an idea that in that $700,000 price range, not a lot of people are able to fit that shoe right now. And when you talk about Lee County, Florida, with 20,000, you start to realize that there's a huge problem in Fort Myers. The problem in Fort Myers stems from the fact that their entire economy became based around new home construction, which meant that a large percentage of their labor force was undocumented. And now with the new changes that we have, you can't have an economy based on exploitation of undocumented workers in the current political administration. Thus, Fort Myers had to come crumbling down because they created an empire based off of undocumented workers building new homes for people that are no longer moving to Florida. The inventory in Lee County, Florida is massive. 20,000 properties, almost 20,000 properties are listed for sale in this area. That's insane. The hurricane's effect on the real estate market confused a lot of people. It's the fact that the hurricanes destroyed jobs and opportunities that led to a real estate decline. It isn't that exactly hurricanes themselves cause jobs to be reduced. In fact, my experience living in Naples is that hurricanes are actually an economical boom. The issue is that hurricanes have destroyed businesses, which in turn has left people with no jobs. And then a lot of people lost their homes back to back again. Places like Charlotte County, Florida are what we know as Hurricane Alley. It's an area that's constantly getting hit by hurricanes. And at this point, people just can't afford to keep rebuilding. A lot of people were also screwed over by their insurance company. So that leads to the problem as well. But the reality of Southwest Florida is that right now, this area is in an absolute real estate decline year over year. So this is a real life trend. This isn't some fake clickbait. I know a lot of the other YouTubers are always saying, Florida's coming to a crash. Real estate insulting. Revenue insulting. We're insulting reality with a clickbait. This is not a clickbait. This is like year over year. Facts are facts. There's a massive real estate decline here. Contributed to immigration policies, contributed to laws that the state of Florida has passed, contributing to, of course, the stock market itself to a degree or another is part of the problem. But if you really want to dive deep into the nightmares and problems of Florida, it all comes down to one single thing. The state of Florida, particularly Southwest Florida, has failed to create jobs and opportunities for people. If people cannot make enough money, they can't live here. Now, the tourists and the snowbirds create jobs. For a while, vacation rentals were a huge thing. Many people are having to withdraw from vacation rentals because of hurricane damages in Sarasota and Manatee, and because they just can't find anybody to rent them in Naples and Fort Myers, which means that many people that were buying properties for vacation rentals are either letting go of their properties or turning them back into normal rentals. Now, you would think with the real estate market in Manatee and Sarasota County being down over 5%, and that, prices are coming down when people are selling properties are sitting longer on the market, inventory is increasing, that rents would come down, but it's not happening, and it's not going to happen because in Sarasota and Manatee County, you have a better economy, you have better opportunities, and what's happening is that people from Fort Myers, Charlotte, and all those areas are filtering up this way and filling in the voids. We also have a lot of schools here, and that means that there's more demand for rental properties than there is for real estate. So right now, even though the real estate market in Sarasota and Manatee County are declining, that doesn't mean that there isn't a demand for rentals. Particularly, I think the student visa situation is what's filled up these apartments. With SB 1718, we lost about 30% of the people that were living in these apartments where I'm at. It just emptied out after the immigration loss, but then the student visas came in and filled it up, and now there's actually even more demand for housing than ever. Like literally the apartment complex where I live, it's hard to find parking now because there's so many people living here, and then there's people living with roommate situations, like 3 to 4 to an apartment. when we first moved to the Sarasota Bradenton area, these apartments were kind of very full because of the COVID people. So we went from the COVID people moving away because they just Florida hadn't worked out for them. Then you had the SB 1718 law. A lot of people left. And then as many people that left, even more moved in with the student visas. So in Sarasota, because of tourism, student visas, and all the people that are coming here to study from international places, Lakewood Ranch, for example, there's actually more demand for rentals. There isn't a demand for buying. So understand that in Sarasota and Bradenton, yes, there's a lot of demand right now for rentals, despite the fact that the real estate market is really dropping prices. So they can't sell these new homes, but they can rent these luxury apartments. And I think too, a lot of the more like affluent immigrants and affluent student visas and people overstaying their visas, they don't want to live in a single family home in the city grid patterns. They kind of want to live in these new luxury apartment complexes because here it feels more anonymous. It's easier for them to blend in and not kind of draw attention to themselves. So what's happening in Lakewood Ranch, for example, is that the rents haven't come down because like these apartments, like the ones you see right here on the right, there's a lot of people with student visas. There's a lot of kids that are overstaying their visas or working students and stuff like that. And these individuals want to live in these types of places because they're more anonymous. So you don't have as many undocumented people living in the city grid pattern. So now all the demand for renting has kind of moved into like newer luxury apartments. A lot of the undocumented students and people staying there, overstaying their student visas and stuff like that, they don't want to live in a residential area where their neighbors next door are homeowners. They want to live in an apartment complex where everybody minds their own business. And that kind of has led to like more demand for rentals in this area. So as far as the rental market goes in Sarasota and Bradenton, it hasn't declined. In Fort Myers, they can't sell anything down there. Rents have gone down $500 and $600. But even I told my wife, despite the fact rents in Fort Myers have gone down $500 or $600, I still wouldn't move down there. And like when we moved from Fort Myers to here, it was actually more expensive to rent in Fort Myers than it is here. That's kind of flip-flop now to where I can move to Fort Myers and save about $500 on rent every single month. And these cities are only, like an hour drive away from each other. But the problem is, what then? Because it's in a decline. I mean, Fort Myers is in a decline. Even with SB 1718, we saw the city of Fort Myers lose a lot of its population. Now with the new law that the state of Florida is trying to pass where the law enforcement agencies have to train to be ICE agents, the city of Fort Myers came in. They're like, yo, we're not participating in this. So it's clear to the city council and commissioners and all those people down there in Fort Myers that their city and their county has taken a huge freaking hit. So now all these things are happening on a state level and a federal level, but the cities and counties down here are kind of now in disagreement with the state because they're saying, yo, we're destroyed. We're losing people. We're losing houses. People are going into foreclosures. Our rents are down $500 a month. Like, we cannot afford to play your culture war because our communities are being destroyed because of it. So it's a huge mess down here. And yes, the area is in a complete decline. But that doesn't mean that the rental market for short-term people, those people are going to keep coming. A lot of people are looking for short-term stays in Southwest Florida, but people are realizing that they want to stay out of the real estate market because it's too risky. That's the other thing. As the liabilities have increased in the real estate market, it's led a lot of people to not want to be part of buying houses down here. A lot of people that want to be in Florida for the vibe are realizing, come to Florida for the vibe, rent for a little bit, but don't make any investments here. And that's what a lot of the young people are doing, those that are more income driven and less, general portfolio or, wealth driven or net worth driven people. All right, guys, so that's a little bit of what's happening with the economy here in Florida. It definitely isn't looking like the type of place where you want to own properties right now, and people are starting to realize that. A lot of people are trying to bail out of the real estate market down here, and they can't get out quick enough. If the Canadians were still here, if the Latin Americans were still here, and if that pattern had continued, Florida would have probably continued to have infinite growth. The problem is that the state of Florida let its culture wars kind of override logic, and they knew what they were doing, and this is what they wanted. So At the end of the day, if you think about all the changes that led to Florida's situation right now, everything here was kind of created to be this way. This is what people wanted, and this is what they got. The issue with Florida is that national topics affect Florida disproportionately. Take the situation with the Canadians. That has affected Florida more than any other state. The situation with Latin America, that has affected Florida more than any other state. The situation with immigration laws. Places like Naples, Collier County have more undocumented people than anywhere in the United States. We were also the fastest growing community for a very long time. All these issues resonate the hardest here versus anywhere else. And now people are finding a situation where things are still unaffordable. They can't make enough money. And on top of that, the economy, the way to make income, has gotten more difficult than ever. I mean, if things were difficult in Florida before, they're even more difficult now. Like I said earlier in the video, Alabama salary, California cost of living, it simply doesn't add up. Everybody's trying to bail out at once, and very few people want to sign that new contract and be the most liable person in America. Because really part of the problem here as well is liability. Hurricanes, crazy and radical laws that are coming to the state more than anywhere else. It seems like every day in Florida you have a new problem. Let's not forget fraud. I mean, that's what's been driving up the cost of insurance. They've been blaming hurricanes and other reasons why the reason insurance is so high in Florida, but it's not. It's fraud. Why is fraud so prevalent in Florida? Because people are trying to keep up lifestyles that are unsustainable. They can't make money legitimately, so they get creative and try to come up with frauds and scams. And it's deprived. I mean, they're grabbing elderly people and taking everything they got from them. Fraud has become a huge problem in Florida. That's a type of criminality. So when things get tough in Florida, the tough get criminal. And Florida has become more criminal than ever. And particularly scamming and fraud has become a huge problem. And it makes insurance extraordinarily expensive. Now, law enforcement in Florida and government, when they do their press conferences, they always give people another misleading idea of what's going on with the real estate world and what's going on with the insurance in particular. The reality of what's going on with insurance is that fraud has become so prevalent that it's driving up the cost of insurance. There's just too much fraud in Florida. And it's because people don't have any other options. People in Florida think that the only way to get a come up is to get a lawsuit or some insurance money. And a lot of people in Florida literally just bank on a lawsuit or bank on an insurance claim to try to resolve their financial issues because they can't see any other way. There's no other state in America that thinks like that. It really doesn't matter how you put it. The real issue with insurance in Florida isn't so much natural disasters as it is fraud. And all this plays into the bigger picture of why owning and signing a contract in Florida makes you liable here more than anywhere else, and people don't want that. Owning in Florida has become a liability where the more you own, the more at risk you are, and people simply want out the boat. I think the saddest part of this is the county that's most affected, Charlotte County, is the county where just the regular people live, the retired people, the affordable retirement. So a lot of times people think that the changes that are happening are for them, and they don't realize that they're the ones who are going to get screwed the hardest by all these changes. You talk about all these things that are happening in Florida. Who is the biggest loser? Charlotte County. What is Charlotte County? Charlotte County is the retired people, the older people. They thought this was all for them, and they're the ones that are getting burned the hardest. It just goes to show that people don't understand. I mean, people are manipulated. People have believed too many things for too long that they think they're being told is for their benefit, but it's not. It's to their detriment. 2020, all people that moved down here thinking that Florida's going to open up for business, and business is going to boom in Florida. What business boomed in Florida? Can somebody tell me what these booming businesses were? When they said Florida's open for business, what business are you talking about? What business boomed in Florida? Scamming, fraud, what boomed? Somebody tell me, when they said Florida's open for business, what businesses were they talking about? Because I don't see any of those businesses. What were they talking about? I don't know what they're talking. Does anybody that live in Florida, when they say Florida is open for business, what businesses were they talking about? Because I don't see it. If anybody can just clarify that for me, I'll look for your answer. What businesses were they talking about? There is none. There's nothing. People believed that incomes were going to rise in Florida. You guys remember the YouTubers from back in the day telling you that incomes in Miami are growing and that Miami was going to become the new San Francisco? It hasn't happened. No, people are going back to San Francisco. People are going back to San Diego. People are going back to Chicago and New York. They told people that incomes in Florida were going to rise and that Florida was going to have better jobs and the incomes here were going to go extraordinarily high. Where are these jobs that were going to come to Florida? When did Miami become San Francisco? None of this happened. And if you didn't learn from the first lie, you didn't learn from the second, now they're telling people that you need to buy real estate in Florida because you're not going to pay property taxes. How many times are you going to be lied to? And people keep believing this. People keep coming to Florida believing these lies, even though lie after lie after lie, people keep falling for it. They told people there were going to be jobs that don't exist. They told people businesses were going to open that didn't open. They told people that Florida was going to become this high-tech hub that it never became. Now they're telling people another lie. Are you going to believe this one as well? Some of these people will. And that's the crazy thing about Florida is that no matter how many times they lie and deceive people to move to the state, they keep moving here. And now there's a new danger in Florida, and it is the amount of prevalent real estate fraud that's going on. People are being rented properties that they don't own. People are being sold houses that are not really theirs. Real estate fraud has become a real serious problem in Florida. And you're not going to get your money back from the sheriff's office when they take your money. When you buy a house and you find out that you don't really own it, good luck getting your money back. And now there's people that are retrospectively going back and doing like a foreclosure scam on people. I don't know how that works, but keep buying houses in Florida. Keep buying real estate that people are bailing out from. People don't get it. It doesn't matter how many times they're deceived to move to Florida and how many times people see that they were lies. People keep believing it. The new gimmick now is property taxes. Good for you. Buy a house in Florida because there's no property taxes. See how that goes for you.